This piece started out as a casual effort to critically analyze some troubling rhetoric that I found in the New York Times, but it's ballooned into so much more, as you can probably tell from the fact that this is my longest video yet. This video is a specific critical source analysis, but also this video is a cautionary tale. I hope that by breaking down the many, many problems with this one specific article, I can show you the ways in which even trusted news sources manipulate us into feeling like we truly understand something without ever coming close to actually informing us of what happened. This is a plea to pay attention not just to the publications you're consuming, but the people involved in those publications and the strength and verifiability of their conclusions. In short, I hope this video might convince you not to take the bait and get riled up about the unremarkable or reinforce a toxic worldview based on half-remembered misinformation. So, with all that out of the way, what am I specifically talking about? What is this article, and what are people saying about it that got me worked up enough to spend weeks researching, writing, and rewriting this video? Well, let's just take a look at what the fine, discerning commenters on r/TrueReddit have to say about a little article called Inside a Battle Over Race, Class, and Power at Smith College.
I think her initial actions are largely understandable, but her failure to address the harm she did is disappointing.
Tolerating
Letting the
stories that sounds like no instructor worth a damn is going to want to work there anyway.
Well, that was a journey. If we're to trust the opinions of these fine internet denizens, it seems we have finally found definitive proof that identity politics is just an excuse for discriminating against white people. Truly, this article must show the ways in which a privileged, spoiled, mean, awful black girl ruined poor white people's lives by accusing them of racism. Surely this is emblematic of how colleges are just nests of whiny rich people going on pointless social justice crusades and ripping the fabric of our society apart. Now, if you want to go along on this journey with me, go ahead and give the article a read. Go on, I'll wait. Just kidding. I know, we're on YouTube. I know nobody here reads things. You're here so I can tell you what I think about something that I read. So, long story short, is this a story about identity politics going haywire and black people maliciously ruining the lives of poor white folk? No. Long story slightly longer, fuck off with your white supremacist baiting old guard bullshit dressed up as concerns that some people have, Michael Powell. If you're excited to drop out and stop watching the second I start going into specifics, I'll go ahead and get the executive summary of my research out of the way. Let's just say that this article contains several examples of actual falsehoods that serve a racist agenda, many more subtly misleading statements and mischaracterizations, and boatloads of tangents and unverifiable claims that are favorites of the conservative, neutral mainstream. This piece reports on a pretty unremarkable series of events in which the school administration responded to accusations of racist behavior thoughtfully and carefully, apologizing to each affected person in public or private as they deemed necessary, and eventually brought in a law firm to review everything that happened and make recommendations on how to avoid a similar issue in the future. However, this article tries to make these banal, mediated events into a riveting or enraging read, trying to lead you to conclusions espoused by those Redditors that students are entitled assholes, using race to systematically oppress poor white people. Okay, everyone who's bored of details can go now, and thanks for sticking around this long. I'll be back soon with a much more riveting, interesting story about Dungeons and Dragons. But anyway, it'll be great. Trust me. Now the rest of us, let's actually walk through the details, which show how this piece is yet another example of our media priming us to accept centrist narratives that absolve white people of their unconscious biases and the real harms they visit on people of color. And yes, that is what we look to with a certain Broadway musical not so long ago, so go ahead and watch that one if you don't know what centrism is or how it perpetuates racism. Let's start by looking at what caused me to dissect this article in the first place. First of all, it doesn't seem very likely that the author of this article, Michael Powell, did much at all in the way of actual reporting. The first clue is the prevalence of vague, unverifiable, unattributed phrases like, a few professors have advised, and many viewed, and campus police had advised staff, and some professors worry, and faculty members pointed to a pattern. Do you see the issues with these turns of phrase? Do they perhaps remind you of anyone who is famous for spreading lies in the guise of vague statements about what some nonspecific people are saying?
And he always seems to have friends who are part of the group that he's currently insulting, calling him up and thanking him for the privilege.
Many of them called me and they said, you know, Donald, you're right. A lot of people are saying they had spies in my campaign.
There is no evidence that actually happened.
And a lot of people said I won, and I'm very happy about that. I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games.
People now saying America is great again.
Based on the writing style of this piece alone, I knew I had to dig deeper, first on the author to see if he was worth listening to, and then on the specific claims made in the article. Right away, the headlines of his most recent articles set a troubling tone. They include, "Obscure Musicology Journal Sparks Battle Over Race and Free Speech," published on Valentine's Day. "Liberals envisioned a multiracial coalition. Voters of color had other ideas," published right after the 2020 election. Or, "White supremacy once meant David Duke in the Klan. Now it refers to much more," published right before the election. Are we sensing a pattern here? Does it feel a bit like the author has become uncomfortable with, let's say, discussions of racism in academia and progressive political spaces? We can glean a little more info about our intrepid reporter from his New York Times biography, which reads, "Mr. Powell was part of the team that won the 2009 Pulitzer Prize for breaking news for its swift and sweeping coverage of the sex scandal that resulted in the resignation of Governor Eliot Spitzer." Before joining the Times, Mr. Powell worked for the Washington Post from 1996 to 2006, where he covered the 2000 presidential campaign and later served as New York bureau chief. He began his career in 1984 at the Burlington Free Press. He studied American and African history at SUNY Purchase College, worked as a tenant organizer in East Flatbush, and received his master's degree from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism in 1984. Hey, that sounds pretty liberal, right? Sure, he humiliated an unpopular but progressive Democrat governor into resigning, but he organized tenants. He studied African history, but did he actually get a degree in African history? Or is that just there to make us not worry about whether he might maybe not be the most progressive in the world? And also, this guy graduated and got his master's degree 4 years before I was born. Let's say he was as young and privileged as humanly possible, incredibly smart, and managed to get an undergraduate and master's degree in only 5 years. That would mean he was probably born right about 1960, making him at youngest about 60 years old. Not mandatory retirement age, sure, but that's because we live in a capitalist hellscape. But he's not exactly a recent academic or someone you'd expect to be doing a lot of boots-on-the-ground reporting, especially during a pandemic. Notably, the article itself supports my guesswork here with phrases like, "She talked to a reporter." Did she? Did she talk to a New York Times reporter? Or are you using quotes from other reporters and not, referencing them? Did you maybe send younger employees at the New York Times to get quotes to fill in blank spaces on the biased article you'd had pre-written since 2019 or so? Now, maybe I'm being a little too critical. I too always avoid using phrases like "speaking to this reporter" because it made me sound like I was on a newsreel in the 1940s, but still, this is an odd sentence construction that tells us exactly nothing about what work the writer of this article did to, report. And that's something we see happening throughout this article. But enough of this critical source evaluation. Who cares if he's maybe not the most liberal person in the world? What matters are the cold, hard facts, because they don't care about your feelings, you libertine cucks. Okay, yes, I haven't kept up on the alt-right guidelines for how to trigger the libs. It's a blind spot of mine, but dang it, I'm trying, for the sake of representing both sides. As I noted, the language of the piece overall is full of vague statements about what professors or faculty or staff think or fear. That's not good enough reporting for the New York Times, so there must be at least some quotes from sources who spoke off the record or wish to remain anonymous, right? Well, no. There are exactly 0 mentions of anonymous sources, or people who wish to remain anonymous or spoke off the record, despite an explicit statement that dozens of people were interviewed for this piece and only half a dozen were quoted. However, it turns out 2 professors are quoted in this article. First, we have a single quote from a Professor James Miller, who the author informs us immediately is, quote, an economics professor at Smith College and a conservative. It seems from his Rate My Professor page that he makes no secrets of his political leanings to anyone who will listen. Professor Miller enjoys baiting his liberal students with his political incorrectness, or at least his libertarian views, the class, and just won't quit using the dating market for cringy analogies for economic principles. Shuts down students who try to argue with him. A class with him. This class was mostly so talking about his political opinions and judgments about everything. Views on the world. 101. But enough ad hominem attacks, me. What did he actually say in his single quote for this piece? He said, quote, my perception is that if you're on the wrong side of issues of identity politics, you're not just mistaken, you're evil. Where have I heard that piece of searing insight before?
They're the party that disappears people or tries to make them apologize for ridiculous things. Hey. Because you're the party of chasing speakers off college campuses and making everyone walk on eggshells and replacing let's not see color with let's see it always and everywhere, formerly the position of the Ku Klux Klan.
We were canceled before canceling was a thing.
Before it was a thing.
This woke thing is out of control. Liberals have become completely intolerant, illiberal. They want us all to lead their lives, and if you don't, you have to be shamed, abused, cancelled, and so on.
Oh, that's right. It's a recurring fear of being canceled. A good old-fashioned excuse to avoid the consequences of your word and deeds, and then bemoaning a lack of civil debate. These people just can't understand why we can't just return to the good old days where you could debate the existence and humanity of human beings you didn't like with impunity, in a calm, rational, civil way. Not like today when everything is just too darn political. But we can move past this self-identified conservative to that one other professor quoted to see if maybe he can prove that professors are gravely worried about this pattern of, whatever it is the author thinks this story is about. Professor Mark Lendler is quoted exactly twice, saying shockingly uncontroversial things that he knows are uncontroversial. Basically, his quotes are only there to remind the reader that poverty and social class exist, and that people at elite universities have a hard time acknowledging that in their discussions. His Rate My Professor page confirms just about exactly what you'd think. He's a long-tenured, pretty thoughtful professor whose students usually seem to really enjoy his lectures. So right away, we can see there's no actual reporting about what professors think or worry about in this article, because there's just no verifiable reporting to justify it. There's one professor who openly flaunts his libertarian or conservative leanings to students and reporters alike, who thinks Smith is too darn liberal, and one professor who acknowledges that he hasn't experienced much discussion of classism alongside racism. Wow, big scoop. But, of course, this article isn't about the professors. This story is about a conservative YouTuber who raised $240,000 on GoFundMe to quit and sue the school for discriminating against her for being white. Oh wait, no, not that. We're here to talk about the events of July 31st, 2018. Ooh, so ominous. What does the article actually say about those events? Well, not a ton, honestly. There's a brief retelling of earlier reporting. It tells us that Omu Kanaute, who I hope I'm pronouncing their name correctly, wrote on her Facebook page about being confronted by campus police while eating lunch in a dorm. She complained that her presence was questioned simply because she was black. After that, almost all the factual reporting seems to be based on the findings of, quote, a law firm hired by Smith College to investigate the episode, which, quote, found no persuasive evidence of bias. Was there non-persuasive evidence of bias? Persuasive to who? Who was this law firm? What was their investigatory technique? Did they offer legal advice, legal conclusions, or just factual summaries? Well, I read the 35-page redacted report, so I can actually tell you. The report was commissioned by Smith College and the Sangavi Law Office LLC, a female-led 6-person law firm that specializes in this sort of fact-finding, did a pretty thorough job investigating and answering, quote, whether any employees violated the college's affirmative action policy in connection with the July 31st incident. They were also asked to suggest any ways in which the college could improve its policies and practices related to reporting of people acting suspiciously, presumably to avoid another incident like this. Therefore, when they found that there was, quote, no persuasive evidence of bias, they weren't declaring that no racism occurred when Ms. Kanute was confronted on July 31st. They merely determined that it was unlikely anyone involved had violated Smith College's affirmative action policy. I read the whole report and took careful notes to compare with the newspaper article, and guess what? Oh my God, you guys, you are never going to believe this. It's really boring. Oh, also the first page of the report immediately makes it clear how biased the article's reporting is compared to a neutral examination by careful attorneys, because the first thing I noticed is that the article refers to Ms. Kanute as a student throughout, but the report refers to her as an employee throughout. Oh wait, the article did eventually say that Ms. Kanute was, quote, a 5'2" runner and science student who worked that summer as a teaching assistant. Therefore, I can't accuse the reporter of covering up that fact, can I? Well, maybe. If I ignore the first actual falsehood in the article, Ms. Kanute was a pre-med student, not just a science student. That's a boring little lie, but its subtle racism encourages us to think critically about why this reporter is using language this way. Why did he neglect to mention that Ms. Kanute and the poor cafeteria worker who got caught up in this incident were former co-workers? I wonder. Could it be so she comes off as an entitled snob instead of a bright and overworked young woman making an effort to contribute to the Smith College community? The next big takeaway from the report is that this law firm was tasked with determining what, quote, more likely than not happened. Translated from legal speak, what this means is that people lie, and the investigators tried to determine who was most likely to be lying when there was a factual conflict and who wasn't. It doesn't mean they had a special lie-detecting serum or have magical insight into what actually happened. It means that they interviewed people and came to their own conclusions about those people's credibility based on their preconceived notions of trustworthiness and the physical evidence available to them. But maybe I'm getting too hung up on this report. Later on in the article, Mr. Powell claims that his description of events was, quote, drawn from the investigative report and dozens of interviews, including with a lawyer for Ms. Kanute, who declined several interview requests. Did the reporter conduct these interviews? Did some other unattributed source conduct these interviews? Don't know. Did Ms. Kanute decline interview requests under advice from her ACLU lawyer? Maybe. If dozens of interviews were conducted, why were only half a dozen people quoted or named? If sources wished to remain anonymous or spoke off the record, why isn't that made clear, like in New York Times political reporting? Well, unless Mr. Powell wants to let me know, I'm probably never going to have an answer to that. So now comes the ugly part where I have to accuse a journalist and a renowned publication of getting facts wrong. That's supposed to be the cardinal sin of reporting because it's the thing that opens you up to defamation lawsuits and a ruined reputation. Back in my day, we shared horror stories of journalists getting caught making up sources and plagiarizing and never being allowed to work again. That's right, they used to be able to cancel you just for lying to the public. What a country. I have to share a list of actual incorrect facts and misleading statements. First, Powell reports that Dennis Meals, one of the professors whose students decried him in 2016 based on his leaked emails, left the school. However, this article claims he retired in 2017 after a long and thorough career to focus on his private therapy practice. So this one's not a lie, it's just kind of misleading to equate his retirement and continuing to make money as a private clinician with being canceled by rowdy college students. Next, we already discussed the misleading references to Ms. Kanute as a science student, so let's just hop right over that one. The first actual lie in this article comes right after, when it claims, quote, student workers were not supposed to use the Tyler cafeteria, which was reserved for a summer camp program for young children. The report is redacted, and I can't be 100% sure what summer program Ms. Kanute was working for, so I don't know if this was a summer camp program for young children. However, the report strongly suggests that the young children in this program were high school girls and not toddlers. But okay, that's oddly misleading, but completely irrelevant. What's actually a total fabrication here is the claim that Ms. Kanute wasn't allowed in the dining hall. The report never says that, and Ms. Kanute repeatedly said that was false. And the fact that she was able to get into the hall kind of supports her claim. Ms. Kanute later reported that a dining staff member told her she wasn't allowed there, but the dining employee denied ever saying that, and no other fact suggests student workers weren't entitled to eat lunch at that dining hall, or that it was reserved for small children or high school girls. Next lie. Quote, a janitor who was in his 60s and poor of sight was emptying garbage cans when he noticed someone in that closed lounge. So, the janitor may have been poor of sight, but I can't prove or disprove that, and neither can the reporter. In his interview for the report, the janitor claimed that he wore glasses for distance and wasn't wearing them that day, but could see just fine. Several witnesses said that he was hard of hearing, but he also never said that he could hear Ms. Kanute's race, so I guess that's just less exciting to report on. Oh, also the janitor claimed he was emptying trash there at the time, but other witnesses said that student employees were responsible for emptying trash during the summer, and denied that janitor's story. And finally, the lounge wasn't closed. The dorm building was not being used as a residence hall at that time, so the lounge was left unlit and unair-conditioned. The very next sentence, the article claims, quote, campus police had advised staff it was wisest to call security rather than confront strangers on their own. This is blatantly untrue, as the interviewed campus security personnel made it clear that staff were trained to either politely ask strangers why they were in an unexpected place, or call campus police, depending on their comfort level. The janitor stated he thought he'd been trained to call police on any unexpected strangers, but that he hadn't ever done so before, and that claim was never borne out in the investigation. Are you getting the sense that maybe this janitor doesn't have the best memory? Well, you're not the only one. And the report is riddled with footnotes noting the discrepancies in his story. Maybe this is a good reason the janitor refused to be interviewed by the Times for this story. Maybe. Just maybe, and this is crazy, the janitor might feel bad about the whole situation, has learned from his mistake, and wants to move on with his life. But anyway, next up, we've got a fun little bit of wordplay to trick you with. Mr. Powell describes the campus security officer who responded to the janitor's call as, quote, a well-known older campus security officer. This implies that Ms. Kanute knew or should have known the officer, without ever directly saying that. However, she did not know that officer, and made that clear in her interviews. But anyway, I know we're already pretty deep into the facts, but the next lies are going to be harder to explain without a brief summary of what the report says happened, so here goes. Overall, everyone interviewed agrees that Ms. Kanute went to a dining hall for lunch, took her lunch to the unoccupied lounge in the same building, then ate and rested in that lounge past 1:30 when the dining hall technically closed. A janitor saw an identifiably black person lounging in the darkened lounge and talked with someone about it without ever daring to enter and confront that person. The janitor then called campus security to report someone of unknown gender lounging in the lounge, describing them as suspicious, but not mentioning their race. An unarmed campus police officer showed up, discussed with the janitor what the problem was, and then walked with the janitor into the lounge. The janitor asked Ms. Kanute what she was doing there, and the campus police officer immediately recognized Ms. Kanute as a student and apologized for bothering her. In videos she recorded of the incident, he appeared to acknowledge how distressing the incident must have been to her, and apologized. After that, Ms. Kanute posted on Facebook that a janitor had called the police on her, that she had seen the janitor speaking with a dining hall employee, and that she was terrified and distressed by the occurrence. Shortly afterward, the president of the college issued a public apology and vowed to investigate. About a month later, while the law firm was investigating, Ms. Kanute wrote a Facebook post asking people to help her identify the janitor who had called the police on her. She posted the name, email address, and a photograph of the dining hall employee she'd seen that day, along with a picture of a janitor who was not involved in the incident, and described them as racist. Mr. Powell's article doesn't ever mention that Ms. Kanute apologized for the misidentification of the janitor. It also misleadingly notes that, quote, Smith College put out a short statement noting that the dining employee had not placed the phone call to security, but did not absolve her of broader responsibility. Apparently, Mr. Powell believed that it was Smith College's duty to not only clear her of the actual act of calling the police, but also declare that she was not a racist? What broader responsibility could they have cleared her of? I'm going to jump ahead a little so I can lump the final misleading statements together more efficiently. Mr. Powell wrote that, quote, "The report said Ms. Canote could not point to anything that supported the claim she made on Facebook of a year-long pattern of discrimination." The report actually says that she, quote, "did not identify any other events that might have illustrated this pattern of discrimination" in her interview. So yes, she didn't list out her grievances in a way that could illustrate the discrimination she faced, but reporting that she could not do it implies misleadingly that it was an impossible task. We do not know how much time she was given to list examples, if she was encouraged to reflect on the question and report back on it, or anything else that might tell us whether it was literally impossible for her to describe a pattern of discrimination based on her race. However, the reporter seems very comfortable in assuming that Ms. Canote didn't suffer discrimination because she wasn't able to detail it during a stressful interview one time, shortly after the incident. Let's also quickly examine this quote. Quote, "4 people's lives were wrecked. 2 were employees of more than 35 years, and no apology." Now, this is a quote from Tracy Putnam Culver, a Smith graduate who has recently retired. But fact check, who are these 4 people? I counted 1 dining service employee, 2 janitors, and that's it. Am I missing someone? No one else was implicated as acting inappropriately. Also, how were these people's lives ruined? One woman did get threatening phone calls which caused stress and exacerbated her autoimmune disease. She recovered, went back to work, and the school's president privately apologized to her. She was eventually furloughed almost 2 years later because of a pandemic. Is that tough? Yes, but it seems hard to blame it all on one accusation of racism. Another employee, a janitor who Ms. Canote apologized to, decided to quit. Yet another janitor was put on paid leave for 3 months, paid leave, and has opted never to speak of it to reporters. Would you say these people's lives are ruined? Would you have to stretch to include the responding officer, who was not called racist and not placed on any sort of probation, to even come up with 4 people who were remotely impacted by this? Would you have to maybe be looking to drum up outrage to even think about treating this retired staff member's statement as, well, worth quoting? Despite being blatantly factually inaccurate, at the very least it seems like a statement worth clarifying, with maybe some further reporting. Finally, I want to wrap up this video by discussing the very real struggles of the dining hall worker who told the Times that she received notes in her mailbox and taped to her car window and phone calls saying things like, "You should be ashamed of yourself," and "You don't deserve to live." Plain and simple, this is terrible. No one should ever tell someone else they don't deserve to live. I hope I can safely say, I don't think anyone should tell anyone else they deserve to die, even if they're sworn enemies with that person for good reasons. It's just not a thing we should say to each other, no matter how vile someone might be. However, focusing on these actions by unknown third parties ignores a pretty vital fact. Ms. Canote did not post the employee's phone number or address. In other words, it seems easy to argue it's as much Ms. Canote's fault that these things happened as it is the employee's fault that the call to campus police happened. They were both involved, but did not directly cause the occurrence, or do the explicitly bad thing. I don't think that makes doxing someone in general as a concept a good or even acceptable thing to do, but Ms. Canote didn't exactly, call a SWAT team against someone only guilty of the crime of supporting Black Lives Matter protests. In other words, what happened to the dining employee after being called a racist wasn't good, but it also wasn't as bad as what routinely happens to Black people who dare to try to get the police to stop murdering them. It's not even as bad as what happens when a virologist attempts to clarify misleading conspiracy theories about the origin of the coronavirus. Smith officials allegedly pressured the dining employee to go into mediation with Ms. Canote. However, the employee declined, saying, quote, "Why would I do this? The student called me a racist, and I did nothing." In other words, the dining employee did exactly nothing to respond to the accusations, except hide and hope that everything would go away. When describing a job interview where her interviewer asked if she was the same person involved in the Smith dining hall incident, the dining employee said, quote, "I was pissed. I told her I didn't do anything wrong, nothing. And she said, well, we're all set. Now, does that sound like an incident where someone became completely unemployable because of past accusations of racism? Or more like an incident where she had a bad interview, where she got flustered and responded poorly to an interviewer? Now, honestly, I pose all these questions as questions because I can't answer them. I will never know the whole truth of what happened to these people. The journalist reporting this will never know that whole truth. The only people who know what really happened are the people it happened to. So, what should you take away from all this? Well, primarily, I just hope you don't act like those Redditors from the top of the video and assume that reading snippets of biased reporting actually informs you of, well, anything. Inform your worldview with things like peer-reviewed scientific data or reporting that at least references and accurately summarizes that data. Be skeptical of specific sources and don't just assume that the New York Times would never lie to you or allow you to be lied to. You don't have to put in all the work I did for everything you read, but assume you should at least Google people to find out if they're well-known charlatans like "Facts don't care about your feelings" poster boy Ben Shapiro, or, in this case, a writer well-known for being critical of attempts to police speech related to race. And finally, when someone is degrading discourse by actually lying to and misleading you, call them out. We don't have to brand people with a scarlet letter L for liar, but people need to at least be held accountable for their words, or we're going to continue to drift on this endless sea of misinformation, and we're going to keep being torn apart by the gap between reality and perception. Already I've seen this article get picked up and regurgitated by dozens of mainstream and alt-right sources, spinning and spiraling the story even further out of control thanks to this one high-profile, irresponsible piece of journalism. And that has consequences. My dearest hope is that the next time I critically examine a New York Times article, I'll instead find that it was neutral, informative, and factually accurate. And that can only happen in a world where we call out the things wrong with the world. That includes questioning the implicit biases all around us, and it includes debunking bad reporting. And with that, I think my job here is done. Thank you so much for joining me on this long and possibly excruciatingly detailed look into news and the ways in which it can manipulate us, potentially without even trying to. Again, I want to reinforce that this isn't a plea to just throw out all mainstream news or anything like that. This is a plea to examine your sources and what they have to say and how they have to say it, because that's critically important to how much you should take away from them. It's taken way too long, and I'm hoping I won't fall into that pit again. But it was certainly illuminating to me to dig in this deeply, and I'm glad that those of you who came along from the ride were here.